The scripture this morning is from the book of Leviticus, the third book of the Pentateuch, chapter 19, verses 1 and 2, and 9 through 18. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap it to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. And you shall not lie to one another. And you shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not defraud your neighbor. You shall not steal. And you shall not keep for yourself the wages of a laborer until morning. You shall not revile the deaf, or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not profit by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate in your heart any one of your kin. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt yourself. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord."
Thank you, Scott, and may God bless the reading of the Word this day. Remember at Advent time and in the Christmas season, we were doing the stories. Ronnie keeps talking about it to me each week. I think Ronnie wanted to see it keep going, through the year. Who are we? I am from Old Spice aftershave and Ivory soap. And I told you a little about myself, and I told you about the apple tree in Mrs. Kiesler's backyard. And so I am from, you kids get away from that apple tree. Have you ever heard that? Get out of that woodshed. You kids come out of that room. Stay away from that table. Get out of that cabinet. What are y'all doing in the refrigerator? Crazy kids. This has been a real week. As I've thought about this text, it's a sit-down week. I think we just need to talk. I've thought again, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday at men's retreat because it's been on my mind all week. And ironically enough, it's one of those things that kept coming up, it's just in my casual television watching. I was reminded again of the story of God on trial. There have been so many stories that came out of this great work called Night by Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel was a Jewish man imprisoned at Auschwitz, one of the most horrible prison camps in Nazi Germany during World War II. And during the many months at Auschwitz, the Jewish people there, the men in the concentration camp, after watching so many deaths and so many people, families separated, children murdered in front of their parents, they put God on trial. Much like the questions that the exiled Hebrew people had. Where is God when all of this is going on? When we read these Old Testament texts that we're reading right now, these are the story of a people coming back from exile. They're written in the person of Moses, as if to say, before all of this happened, and we've talked a bit about, yes, they had the oral traditions. And in spite of all of the stories, and in spite of God's protection, in spite of the fact that God lived in the temple, on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, watching with a protectful eye over all of Israel, God's chosen people, in spite of all of those things, how did these people become exiled? It's the question that Philip Yancey took on so many times. Where is God when it hurts? And so we ask it. What does it mean that God is holy? Or as Jesus says in Matthew's gospel, that God is perfect. And then Both Moses and Jesus seem to be saying to you and me, and to the listener or the reader, be thou perfect. Be thou holy as your Father in heaven. What does it mean to be holy? Well, I think one of the things that it has meant to me over the years is there's a sense of separation in holiness. Do you get that? I mean, God is holy and we're not. God is perfect and we're not. The world is flawed. The world is broken. The world is completely messed up. There are a lot of things that don't work right. We talk about the world as if, you know, it's a microwave oven that every once in a while doesn't come on right, or the light doesn't work, or the bell doesn't ring, or it's the refrigerator with the light out or something. There's something wrong with all of this because God is holy and God is perfect and God is pure. And so obviously holy and sacred and perfect is something separate. And so we learn then how to revere it, like we revere the table, like we tell the kids, get away from that table, get away from that tree, get away from all of that. Don't touch it. Don't misunderstand me. It's important that children learn things like these candles are full of oil and they're hot and the juice can spill. It's important that kids learn that there are rules to getting apples from the tree, and it's important that children know that things in life can have a way of biting back occasionally. But we have separated God for the sake of holiness. We have separated everything that we want to strive for, and then we've created the strife to get there. You know what the problem with that is? We do that over and over with a lot of things in life. And then the problem is that we'll set little goals that we can make, and we'll work just hard enough to get there, and then when we acquire whatever it was that we were after, you know, the perfect spouse, the perfect house, the perfect job, it might just be a trip to the movies this week or a chance to eat out. But whatever it is, after the experience is over, we find ourselves left a little wanting. And we think to ourselves, it really wasn't worth all the work, and I really put the whole thing up here in a place it didn't belong. And so in order to make it right, we set yet another holy goal, another sacred journey, and we take off one more time. So God is holy because God is revered and separate and awesome. Holy is awesome, isn't it? I mean, how many times do we say, our God is an awesome God? What does that mean? Does anybody know? Awesome? I'm sure it means a lot of things, but is it falling short for you? Because it is for me. You see, God is so awesome. God is so awesome that I know people whose parents got by with abusing them for their entire childhood. God is so awesome that a woman in our own community actually neglected her child to the point of death. Where was God when that was going on? Our God is so awesome and so holy and so sacred and so pure that that same woman who neglected her child to the point of death and is now rightfully going to prison was neglected and locked in a closet all of her childhood and her life. And God is so awesome and holy and pure that we have compassion for this poor little girl who's been locked in a closet all of her life, and yet we have the same sense of justice that she cannot be allowed to cause the death of a child without suffering consequences. God is so pure and so awesome that occasionally mom or dad leave home. God is so awesome and pure that 6- and 7-year-old children get diabetes or cancer or kidney problems and they die. God is so awesome and pure. We watch our parents and grandparents go through the suffering of burying their own children. I'm only asking the question you want to ask. If God is so awesome, why do these pathetic things happen? Maybe they happen on God's day off. Maybe God wasn't paying attention on that day. But how is it that things like this happen when there is a God who is so sacred and so pure and so awesome that God could have stopped all of this, at least in my sense of logic? God could have stopped all of this, and then here I go. Now I'm going to excuse God because you do. Well, I don't think like God. God sees the bigger picture. God can do what God wants to do. Well, you know, all of those things are absolutely true. And they still don't answer your question, do they? And if you're angry at me right now, it's because you've never been locked in a closet by a parent, or you've never been struck in an inappropriate way by a parent, or you've never been touched in an inappropriate way by somebody else, or you've never been convicted of something you didn't intentionally do. You've never cried out for help and no one was there to help you. No one should be angry by now. Haven't I gotten somewhere where everybody lives for just a moment? It's easy when you're the victim. But why don't we afford the same dignity to offenders in our culture that we demand for the victim? Because God seems to be wanting that. And God is holy, and God is pure, and God is sacred, and God is awesome, and God is perfect, and God has now said to you and I through Jesus and through Moses, "Be thou perfect, just like your Father in heaven is perfect." So when I saw this thing called God on Trial this week, they told like a fourth of the story. They told you how the Jews in Auschwitz put God on trial and they found God guilty of negligence. They determined that God is not good always, because a good God could not let these things happen. End of report. I didn't feel good. Because, see, I knew the rest of the story, and they didn't tell you the rest of the story on this particular television program. The script just called for it stopping there. But the rest of the story is that the next day, they went back to practicing all of the prayers and all of the rituals and all of the festivals that they could get by with practicing, in the way that they could get by with doing it in a concentration camp. In other words, the next day they began again to bless the name of the Lord. To go through the rituals of atonement and to seek forgiveness and atonement, and to go through each ritual and to worship a God who had been negligent was in their own way saying that we have forgiven God, we have forgiven life. As difficult as it has been for Elie Wiesel, he has actually been a part of forgiving the German people in his old age. You see, they went right back to the only thing that we have, the goodness of God, which is not negated by evil in the world. It simply leaves us with questions. And I can't answer them. And neither can you. But Jesus clears a little bit of it up for us. What does it take to be holy and to be perfect? What does it take to be thou perfect, just as your God is perfect? What does it take to be thou holy, just as your God is holy? Evidently, the thing that Moses and Jesus preach in common is that we should be making ourselves involved in the lives of others. You know, this Leviticus reading today sounds a lot like the Ten Commandments in places. Don't steal, don't defraud someone by telling lies against them. And it keeps going. Don't withhold their pay until morning. Did it ever occur to you that a day laborer may depend on those wages to eat supper tonight or to have a place to sleep? Don't withhold that wage until tomorrow morning when you have a bed to sleep in and the person who worked for you. Don't glean the edges of your field. Now see, you don't have to think about this because most of you don't have a field. And even if you do, there's not a lot of people wandering around here picking apples off the trees in the edge of our orchards today. But listen to the word of Moses. Leave that on the edge of the field for the poor, for the alien. For the alien. Once they climb the wall, once they swim the river and go to all that trouble to get here, leave it for the alien. You know what really I like that one best? You know why? Because what strikes me about that is you don't get to say, well, here's $5, but don't spend it on alcohol. I will give you a sandwich, brother, but no money. Do you understand me? I won't help you drink. I'll give you money. You don't get to say, well, you're like this fault. You've made poor decisions in life. It's probably true, but how did that help anything? What I like about not gleaning the field but leave it for the alien is because you get to stand in the window and look out and go, of all the people to be picking my apples, I didn't want it to be that sorry, bratty little Royston kid. Why couldn't it have been the kid down the block who always says nice things? Jesus says, man, he's walking all over this thing. He's walking all over the Old Testament. He says, you know, you've heard it said, man, if they take one of your apples, you take one of theirs. But I'm saying to you, just give them the whole tree. If they strike you on the cheek. You know what this 1 mile thing is all about? In Jesus' day, a Roman soldier could walk up to a civilian on the street, a Jewish man, and say, you will carry my pack. And the law protected the slaves by saying you can only ask them to carry it 1 mile, and then you have to give them a break. And so Jesus says the next time one of your enemies comes up to you and says to you, you oppressed, worthless, meaningless person, carry my pack. Jesus says, look at them and say, gladly. How about 2 miles? Evidently, we had this thing wrong. Sacred and holy and perfect is not separate. Evidently, what God has been trying to say is, do you know how difficult it is to be perfect and holy and pure and sacred in your eyes? I'm trying to get in the middle of your life, and you keep pushing me into this temple up on the great mountain, or into these secret places in your life, or into places that you cannot attain to and you cannot reach, and I'm begging you to be like me because I want to be a part of you. I want to be here with you. I'm surprised Jesus didn't say, when you see an alien gleaning the edge of your field, go out and help them pick up the fruit from the ground. Holy is not separate. It is so closely involved and intertwined that you begin to not be able to tell the poor from the rich. You begin to not be able to tell the victim from the oppressor. You begin to not be able to tell the sinner from the saint. It's a beautiful story about 2 priests who went on a mission into the city, and the elder father said to the young novice, he said, go about your business tonight and meet me here at the gate in the morning, and we'll walk back to the abbey tomorrow. And they met in the morning, and as the older priest began to greet the young novice in the morning, he saw that the novice was very troubled by something, and every response was terse. And so, quietly, they began to walk back to the city, or to the abbey, I'm sorry. And along the way, the novice walked slow enough until the elder priest had walked ahead, and a great distance had come between them. And so when the priest reached the abbey, he stopped, and he waited. And when the younger novice caught up with him, he looked at him and he said, tell me what's troubling you, son. And the novice began to cry, and he said, last night in this city, Father, I broke my sacred vows and I slept with a woman. I am unworthy, he said, to enter the abbey at your side. And the elder priest looked at him and he said, well, you will enter at my side. Together we will go into the abbey, and together we will go to the altar, and together we will confess your sin, so that only God will know which one of us fell. Jesus is evidence that that a holy and sacred and perfect God wants to be right in the middle of your life and mine, and especially our life together. Where do you look then? Where do you look for God? When Elie Wiesel finishes Night, he talks about the Jews after God's trial and after returning to worship, as they're paraded by one day, 3 figures on a gallows. And they walk past the first 2, and they see 2 old Jewish men hung by the neck, dead. But the third figure is a young boy. A young boy who is dying slowly, the weight of his body not enough to strangle him mercifully, quickly. And they're forced to stand and watch as his tongue swells and falls from his mouth and his eyes glaze over, and the whole scene takes a while. And one voice is heard from behind Wiesel. Where is God now? And it's Elie Wiesel who points. And he says, there is God, dying on the end of a rope. See, I'm going to say it again. We think when we go to prison to visit people, we're being Jesus, and we're going and taking poor people who are probably going to hell anyway because they're not good people to begin with, and they obviously did something wrong, and no one's arguing that, I suppose, but then here we are being the compassionate Christ to the person who doesn't deserve mercy, and Jesus in Matthew's gospel says, that's not right. I am the offender. When you brought me something in jail, I was the person in jail. When you clothed that naked person, I was the one who was naked. When you look out your window and those doggone kids or aliens or poor people are gleaning your field again, and you pull out your deed and you say, you kids get out of that apple tree. You're not justified. At least not in this story. Jesus is not the one shouting through the window, get away from that table. Jesus is the poor man eating the scraps that fell from the table. This is why we need to talk. I don't have an answer. I don't know what that means. I don't think that it means that you can't own property or that you can't protect what you have. I don't really have the answers. I don't know how you justify, how you deal with a woman who murders a child neglectfully after being neglected all her life. I don't think you can just look the other way and say, well, in a perfect world, and God makes... These are hard questions to wrestle with. And I think sometimes there aren't any answers. We just have to trust God enough to be in the questions with God. But I do know that whenever you look for God in any situation, God is with the poor and with the oppressed. And if we, the poor and oppressed, in our liberation become the oppressor, God changes sides very quickly. I don't know but one thing to do, and that is to work at making myself more vulnerable to others and more a part of their lives. I want to be a bigger part of your life than I've already been, and I may be biting off more than I can chew because I'm running as hard and as fast as I can just to pray for all of you right now, but I want to be more. I want to be where you need me to be. Don't you? Well, maybe the song said it best. We are in need of mercy and in need of grace.